everyone to um, our second week. Oh, sorry, not second week, 12th week of our Webflow workshop series. So this week the agenda is we'll cover a bit on like publishing and hosting, which is like the final thing that we didn't finish from last week. And then we'll go into what our project is, which I think I already introduced. The idea is to just build your own website. It can be one page. If you can do more pages, even better. Like 2 or 3 pages. They don't have to be complicated. You can look for an example online and just copy that. But we'll start that project. I will also build a page um, as well, because then we can go through like from the beginning, starting a new Webflow project, putting into practice everything we learned. And then, so it'll be this week. These next 3 weeks, we'll be working on that project together. And as I build it, I'll talk about the different, features, Webflow features I'm using, how I'm building. And then you guys can also use that as a way to review what you already know about Webflow. I don't know if we'll finish I have this sample here. So this is what we're going to build. I don't know if we'll finish all the pages, probably just one, which is fine. But if you can do more than one page, then feel free to do that. So starting with publishing and hosting considerations. So this was the final thing that we didn't cover last time. Last time we did SEO, I think mainly SEO. Oh, and optimization, accessibility, all of that. So let's say your Webflow, project is completely finished and you're now ready to publish it. How do you go about doing that? So on the right here, you can see that there is a publish button. And when you click it, you have two options. So you can publish to staging. Staging is essentially like the practice version of your site. So it functions like a real page completely. So if I open it, you can see it's a real page. I can share the URL, but you'll notice that the URL ends with .webflow.io. So this is just the practice version of your site that you can use to test out new things, to play around with different things. Also, you don't need to pay to publish to staging. Like for example, on this plan, we haven't paid for anything. We haven't paid for hosting, but we can still publish to staging. So it's also good when you are building up practice sites because you don't need to pay for, you know, a custom domain or anything like that. So that's staging. When you start working with clients, also a lot of the time before you are ready to push your build live, you will work with the staging URL. And then when you are ready to push the official version of the site is when you'll publish to production. So that's staging, and then there's production. Before I go into here, you'll notice here it tells you when is the last time you published. It'll do the same thing here as well. When you publish the production, it'll give you when you last published. And then you also have an option to unpublish. It will just automatically remove um, that version online. So if somebody tries to access this URL again, they won't be able to because you've unpublished the site. Now, if I go into here, advanced options, these are just these, you don't necessarily need to pay too much attention to. But the 3 things that you should try and make sure are checked are just minify HTML, minify CSS, and minify JavaScript. That's just something that is really recommended. So you can just go in and remember to do that. But otherwise, you don't need to really play around with the advanced options. So let's actually go into settings real quick as well. So I'll go into my site settings. And so under site settings, you'll see that there's a tab for publishing. And here there's like a bunch of different things. So first thing, there is info on your staging domain. So you can actually change the name of this domain that you want. So right now it's just Webflow Workshop Sessions, but I could change this to whatever I want and then save. You can also make your staging link private, but this is only available in enterprise plans, which is the most expensive plan on Webflow. So if you were working with a big client that wanted to make sure that their website, because once you publish your staging domain, anyone can access it if they know the URL, right? So sometimes clients want to make sure that their website is not accessible until it's ready to go live. So this is an option to make it private. So you do need to probably put in a password to access the site. but you only have that option on enterprise plans. And like most clients really don't particularly care about this. And then here is where you would have your production domain information. So right now it's telling me I need to upgrade my plan to add a custom domain because I don't have any site plan. And maybe I'll briefly cover site plans too. So before I can even add in a custom domain, I would need to add a site plan first. We'll come back to that. If you go down, there's like redirects, which I won't go into too much detail. You can read up on it, but as you're building a site and it becomes larger, you might sometimes have an old link that you want to redirect to a new link. Or if you're migrating a site from, whatever version it was before, and you're now building it in Webflow, there might be old links that the site was using that you want to now redirect to new links. So you can add in those redirects here. That's why they're called 301 redirects. So for example, if you used to have an about page, but now you unpublished it, you don't have it anymore, but obviously people might still have access. Anytime you search something, it remembers what you've searched before, so it can give you, recommendations. Like if I search host, it gives me all these recommendations. So you have to assume that people who've accessed your site probably have those URLs saved. So in order to avoid for them ending up on an error page, you would just redirect them. So anyone who tries to go to the about page, for example, would be redirected, to the home page. So that's what redirects are for, and they're very, very important, um, especially as you're building more complex sites, because you want to make sure the worst case scenario is to have a user end up on an error page. You want to make sure that users are always redirected to the appropriate pages. So I'm just going to, because I want to actually show what it looks like when you add a custom domain. So I'll use my website as an example, and I'll go into publishing. So you can see here that I've added a custom domain. And this is what it looks like once you add your domain. There are a few different ways to add a custom domain. There's Quick Connect, which usually will just have you log into your domain provider and then connect it that way. I think that's probably the easiest. And then you can also manually add domains where Webflow will give you instructions on how to do that. And then you can also buy a domain, I guess from Webflow maybe directly, or maybe they have other providers that they're collaborating with. I've never done this personally, but these are a few options you have. And then you also have the Webflow has a lot of instructions to help you in figuring out how to add your custom domain. Once it's added and it's connected, it'll let you know, it'll give you that status here, connected. And then, like I said before, it lets you know when was the last time you published. So you can see here, I haven't published my site in a while. So it's 2 months ago. Um, Going down to the redirects just to show you what that looks like as well. So you can see here, as you add ones, it just keeps records of all of them. So in this case, I made a redirect, for example, slash case study Amaria social. I instead want to go to slash case study Amaria because I changed the URL here. So now if somebody were to access this old URL when they put it into their, browser, it would just redirect them to the new one instead of sending them to an error page. So you can always go and delete redirects. You can import redirects if you have them on a like an Excel or a spreadsheet. You can export all these URLs as well. But yes, that's you can sometimes if you have a ton, you can also search, so it's easier to find different ones. But that's just quick instructions on redirects. And then going back to publishing, you'll see here now that because I have added a custom domain to the site, you can see that also appears here when you click publish, and you also still have the option to unpublish. Now, you can see here, this is a unique case, but I actually can't unpublish this because Webflow has a showcase library where you can share your site or showcase your site, have it be viewed by others through the Webflow, well, I don't know what you call it. It's called Made in Webflow, the gallery. So you have an option to do that anytime you build a site. I'm not going to go into it, but you can look up how you do that. So once you do that, you actually cannot unpublish your site, the staging version, until you remove it from Made in Webflow because Webflow is featuring it in its gallery. So you can't then unpublish it and then make it inaccessible. So that's just a specific use case. But otherwise, I think this is really the most that you need to know about publishing. You don't have to publish staging and domain at the same time. You can publish one only. It'll just tell you if it's different, you'll be able to see according to, the days. So it'll say, oh, this was published 1 hour ago, or this was published 3 days ago. They don't need to match each other, basically. The last thing I will say, actually, I was going to go into publishing for CMS, but we may have covered that already, how that works. If not, you can let me know and I can cover it in the next session. But I do want to move into actually building our new project. So to build our new project, we're actually going to create a new site for it because I don't want to have to, we obviously have used a lot of different classes and whatnot here, and I don't want to have to use all of those again. So I'm gonna create my new site, and Webflow actually recently updated their interface. So there's a lot of cool new stuff here. Like you can use AI site builder, which I haven't personally used yet. You can build from a template or you can start from scratch. So that's what we're gonna do. And we're gonna name, because this is the site we're gonna be rebuilding, we will name it the same name. So we'll call it Don Mosley and we'll create sites. Okay. So now that is created, we have a blank page, and as always, we want to start off with a style guide. So I'm going to create a new page and I'm just gonna call it style guide, and I'm going to save it as a draft because it doesn't need to be published, it just needs to exist in my page. So in the old Webflow project I was working on, I'm just gonna copy the style guide that they have, and oops, I'm going to just paste it into my page. So now I have my style guide set up already. Now, the next thing that I normally like to do is to set up my fonts and my colors. So because I am rebuilding an existing, site, I need to find out what colors and what colors and what fonts they're using. So for fonts, I like to use this tool called What Font. If you're using Chrome, you can get it from the Chrome plugin store or whatever it's called. 1 second, I'm getting an important call and then we'll resume. Okay, let's continue. So we were looking at fonts and seeing what font that we could use here. Let me just make sure I'm unmuted. Okay. So we're looking at fonts and seeing what fonts are best to use in these scenarios. So I use what font. So you just activate that and then you can select any text on the page and it'll tell you what font it's using. It works 90% of the time. Sometimes it might not work depending, like if a text is within, an image or something like that, but 90% of the time it works. So for example, this is called Gilda Display, this heading font that they're using. And then for the regular body fonts, it seems that they're using Helvetica. I'm just scrolling through the page and checking a bunch of different, like all of the copy, because I want to make sure that they aren't using a third font as well. And then when you click on it, you'll also get like what font weight it's using. You'll get the size of the font. You'll get the color. So it's a really useful tool. So now that I know that they're using Gilda Display, I can first and foremost, I'm just gonna open up the site settings. So that's where you add the fonts. So you go to the fonts tab. And then you can add in fonts from Google or Adobe fonts, or custom fonts. So I'm gonna see, okay, and they have Google Display. So usually the Google Fonts has a lot of different fonts. So if you are replicating or if you're building anything, it's good to check before you try and like download the fonts separately. It's good to check if it's in Google Fonts. So in this case, we do have Gilda Display in our Google Fonts, so we'll add that. And then the second one is Helvetica, which I just want to make sure. Maybe Webflow has Helvetica. Okay, Webflow doesn't have Helvetica in their default fonts, so we're gonna add that as well. Oh my God, is Helvetica not a Google font? That is very surprising to me that it's not. Okay, well then we'll have to. I'm pretty sure I have Helvetica in my in my Mac. So I'm gonna see if I can actually get the font. Or worst case scenario, I might just use a different font that is similar to Helvetica, like Enter. That's one that I actually like to use a lot. So we're just gonna use Enter because I don't want to do the whole process of finding Helvetica and adding it to my, library. That's a lot. We're just gonna replace that with Enter. So now that we've added the fonts, you actually do need to refresh the page in order for the fonts to be accessible. So we're gonna do that. And then I'm going to select my body because I want to update the font for my project as a whole, right? So I'm going to select body and then body all pages. So this will mean it will apply to all my pages. And here under font, you can see the default font is Arial. This is the default size, default color. So we're going to change the default font to be Enter. It's number one. Size, let me just go in, and default size is something obviously you can change accordingly, but I like to pick what's the most common size that they use. So usually it's either 16 pixels or 14 pixels or 18 pixels. And it's the body copy size specifically, not the headings. So I think for theirs, the default font is usually 16 pixels. And we're going to be using REM in this build. So since I use it a lot, I know a lot of the conversions, but 16 pixels is the same as one REM. And then for font height, I like to use for body copy 1.4 dash. I feel like that's a good amount of spacing. You can see here the difference between what it was before, where the lines are kind of just too close together, and then what it is now that I've updated that. And then for color, this whole website is actually one background color. So another cool thing that we can do is if I, let's say, knew I was also building the bio, I could go into the bio page. I could go into a bunch of these other pages to check, do they all have the same background color? In this case, it actually seems to be the case. So another thing I could change is the color of the background. Like if the background for this website is mostly this green color, then I may as well change it from there. So I'm gonna grab the color that's used here. So I use this app called Color Slurp, which is pretty useful. You can pick anything on the page and it'll tell you what color it is. So in this case, this is the green color that it is. So I'm going to apply that there. And the other thing I'm also going to do is I'm going to add this color to my library. So you can do it by clicking into the variables menu, or you can just do it from here. So I'll name this primary green because it's my primary color and it's green. So now that green color is added. For my copy, I'm going to make that white. And then I'm also going to add this to my library. I'll put this under shades. I normally put like white, black, gray under shades. So separate from like primary and secondary colors. So we'll say this is shades white. So you can see it's actually updated on this page as well. So the text is now white and the background is now this green color. Now that we've done that, we can go in and actually update our heading. So you'll notice here that we are still on the style guide. We have not built the homepage yet because you save a lot of time and energy when you make sure that your style guide is complete before you actually build your page. So I'm just showing you my process. I don't change everything on this page because it's a lot, but I change a lot of the key things, which is fonts, colors, buttons, etc. So for example, for H1, we can go in and see, okay, for example, this is probably their H1, this big one. Or you might say, okay, maybe this is not H1 because sometimes there's H1, but sometimes there's also like this extra large, text size that people use for, visual effect. So you could say this is the H1, or you could say, well, this is probably a separate one and H1 is a bit different. For the sake of just time, I'm just going to assume this is H1. So you can see here, it is 247 pixels. I actually don't know what that conversion is because it's a pretty big number. So I normally use this site. It's called nicocalc.com pixels to rem converter. And you can put in either the rem or the pixels and it'll tell you what the conversion is. So 247 pixels is the same as this in REM. So I'm just going to say maybe 15 REM. So we'll go in, we'll select H1. Remember, we don't change it first because if you change it first, it'll create a class for it. We don't want to create a class for it yet. We want to edit the HTML tag for this element, which basically means by default, H1, H2, H3 will have this field. If we want to make them change, then we can add a class. And this is something we've talked about before, and I would highly recommend don't create unique classes for everything. some things you don't need to create unique classes for. You can use these HTML tags instead. It creates cleaner code. So under H1, I'm going to select all H1 headings. I'm going to remove the margin and it comes with like margin by default, which I normally don't like because I like to do the spacing by myself. So I'm just going to set that to 0. And here under size, we're going to say 15 rem. It looks crazy right now because the height is fixed. So we're going to, for headings, I like to use a slightly smaller height change. So like 1.1, 1.2. So that's what we're going to do. So you can see this is huge, which is fine. I mean, it's our style guide, so it doesn't really matter. The last thing I'm going to change is the font. So all our heading fonts are supposed to be Gilda display. So I'm going to change it to Gilda display. And then keep in mind also font weight. By default, headings are bold, but in this case, they're actually using a normal font for the heading. So this is H1. Now you'll see that there's H1, the HTML tag, and then H1 with the class. This is because sometimes you might have a variation, or you might, well, I guess I'll explain as I build the page. But when I am building up my style guide, I normally just make these equivalent to each other. So this is 15 rem. So this will also be 15 rem, and the font weight will be normal. So next we have H2. So we're going to go down and select our H2, which is probably this, or might be this. I think actually this. Yeah, this is larger. So, oh, and there's also this. Yeah, there's a lot of fonts. So, and there's this. Okay, this is similar to the H1. So this seems to be our second biggest size. So we can say this is H2 and it's 210, which let's just say 13 rem. So we're going to make our H2. We're going to select H2, 0, 0. We're going to say 13 rem. And we're going to apply that, and we're going to make the, oops, yellow display font weight normal. So same thing with the H2 class. We're going to do the same thing and make it normal. Next, we have H3, which is going to be this. So that's 1 to 8. I should know what this is. Yeah, 8 rem. So we're going to select H3, all H3 headings. We're going to say 0, 0. And we're going to say this is 8 rem. And we're going to change the height to 1.1. We're going to change the font to Gilda, and we're going to change that to normal. Now, another thing to keep in mind is you can also add fonts, font weights to variables. I normally only add colors to variables because that's just how I work, but just reminding you that there is that option that you can, go in and add all of these to variables if you want to. So we're going to do the same for the H3 class. We're going to set the size to 8 rem and the weight to normal. Next, we have H4. So our fourth smallest heading size, which is this, and that's 80 pixels, which is the same as 5 rem. So we're going to remove the margin on the top and the bottom, set this to 5 rem, and this to 1.1. We might actually want to increase this 1.2. So the smaller your text is, um, if this is a small value, then it appears closer together. So your headings don't all have to have the same, 1.1. Actually, this should be 1.1. They don't always have to have the same. This is 1.1, this is 1.1, this is 1.1. Depending on the text size, you can adjust so that it looks, the idea is for it to not, the lines not to look so close together because then they are very hard to read. So I'm going to also update this. This should be 5 rem and normal. And then we have our H5. So we're going to look for our fifth smallest heading here, which actually there might not be. Okay, there is this, which is 45 pixels. We have two more tags left. So yeah, sure, we'll use 45 pixels in that case, which is 2.8 rem. So we'll just say 2.8 rem there. So we'll change that to 2.8 rem, and we'll change that to 1.2. We'll remove the margin. We'll make this normal and Gilda. So we'll do the same thing here. We'll make it 2.8 and normal. And then our last one is H6. We don't have a H6 heading here. We might on the other pages. It's very possible. I haven't taken a look, but you probably the best thing is to do so, or if you're designing it yourself, you already know all the heading sizes anyway. But I'm just gonna, okay, we went from 2.8. So let's just say this is 2 rem. We'll say, and I'll make it 1.3. So we'll say this is going to be our 2 rem heading. which is the same as 32 pixels. And then we'll do the same for our H6 heading class. So these are all our headings. You can see this site is like pretty dramatic, which is why there's such a huge heading discrepancy. Most sites aren't really like that, but this is kind of more of a unique one. That's why it is like that. So now we're done with our headings. We can go down and you can see here it's updated my headings in my, style guide as well, because I use the HTML tag as opposed to using classes. So any place where there's like, okay, this is H3, this is H2, it'll adapt that sizing. The size looks different because it has a class that has a different size, but everything else, if you click this, for example, it'll tell you this is coming from the H2 heading tag. That's why I really emphasize the importance of using tags. Now we can edit our paragraphs as well if we wanted. I'll probably just leave this the same. Like 9 times out of 10, this is not something you need to edit. We already set our default size on the body, so we don't need to set it here. If I go down, these are also normally fine, like the default text sizes it provides. If you wanted to change that, you could. I will leave it as is. And then I'll go down to button. That's probably what I want to do next. So seems to me that this site doesn't really. Okay, so they have this kind of button here. And then, I mean, I could go to the bio page to see if they have a different kind of button there. Doesn't seem to be the case. So let's say they have two kinds of buttons. They have this underline, like text button, right? And then they also have this button. So we can say maybe this is our primary button. They also have this, but I think this is the unique to the form. So we won't really add that in our button styling, but we'll add these two. We'll add this one and then we'll add this. So starting with this, we can use our font thing once again to identify what size is this font. So it's 16 pixels. So we're going to select our button. We're going to name it button. And then it's 60, it's white. It's white and the color is on the inside is black. So we're gonna make that black and we're gonna add the black to our variables as well. So shades black. Since it's completely round, I usually just put a really high radius value in that case. And then there's no tool, at least that I know of, to give you like sizing for the padding. So it's really just a matter of just guessing the sizing. So in this case, one thing is that we want to also make sure that it's capital, because in this case it is capital. So you normally do that by here where it says decor. You click these three dots. Oh, this is different. Sorry. Webflow updated things recently, so it's new to me. If you go to more type options, you'll see there's a bunch of different stuff, and one of them is capitalized. So you can make it lowercase, sentence case. In this case, we're going to make it capital. The other thing I actually forgot to check is the font weight. So 700 is bold. So we're going to also update the font weight to be bold. For the padding, I'm just going to like estimate roughly what it could be. Let's say that's the padding. So 1.5 RAM, 1.5 RAM, 2 RAM, 2 RAM. I feel like that roughly looks like what it looks there. So that's good to go. I'm not going to add in these transitions yet. We'll do that at the end. Um, so we'll just leave that as it is. So you have different button styles here. There's a primary button style, but there's also a secondary version, which is usually the version that you might have. Like, for example, this is the primary version on the dark green background. What if there was a case where I'm using a lighter background? Obviously, I need to use, a darker version in that case. So we don't actually, I don't think we have a second version of our button, but you can create one just in case. So if I'm assuming that my background is white, then I need to use dark colors. In this case, they gave it a border. I don't really want to use a border. I'm just going to instead use green and then make the text white. So this will be the secondary version of my logo. It's hard to see here, but if I, for example, added, color here, you could see that distinction differently. So this will be the button I use on a lighter background if needed. Then there are also like smaller versions of your button that you can use. You can like slightly tweak those. Um, you can even change the font size, like maybe the font size of a smaller button is this. And then you can also have large buttons, which you can increase the font size. I'm gonna undo that or anything like that. I don't think we're going to use any of these, but it's good to just make sure that they're set. The one that we will use is the text one, which is this one. So this particular button with the underline. So we're gonna use that. And I think that's probably also 16 pixels. Yes. So it's also 16 pixels. We are going to update the color to be white. We're going to actually remove all the padding because I don't think it has any padding. And then see, this is either an underline or a border. Let's try underline first to see how that looks. So if we give it an underline, and then also I think the font weight is just normal. If we give it an underline, it seems like it's too close to the text. So it must probably, instead of underline, they probably used a border because a border is how you can add in, this line effect without using the underline tool. So with my button selected, I'm just going to go to borders and I'm going to specifically select the bottom border because that's where I want to add my border. And I want to make it white and it's going to be 1 pixels. And then make sure that you also select this so that it's showing. So now we can see that there is a white border showing. It did have a radius, so we're just going to set that to 0. So now we can see that our button is there with its line. And then the font weight is supposed to be normal. So that's going to be the last thing that I, change about this button. So font weight normal. I think that's probably good. So now our button sizes are set, which is great. The last thing that I normally like to change is also colors. So text colors, there are a couple options, primary, secondary, alternate. You can add more. By the way, anything on this style guide, you can like add or delete from if you want. So in this case, my primary text color is probably going to be white because my background is dark. And then my secondary text style can be green in cases where I need to use green. And then alternate is usually like this gray color. So I'm gonna make that a bit lighter, like maybe that. And I'm gonna add that to my variables as well. So this is my gray shade. If I go to background colors, you can also update this. So like maybe instead of, well, this can be black, that's fine. Maybe our secondary background color is green instead. Maybe our tertiary background color is, I actually don't think this website has a tertiary background color, but let's say, we'll just say it's gray. Oops. And then our alternate background color is just this white. So these will be our different background colors. All these other things I don't normally edit. The only other thing you might want to edit on the style guide is the form. So if I go all the way down, you'll have this form, and we do have a form on our homepage. So we will need to edit the form, but just for now, I'm going to leave it as it is because I like to edit the form once I'm actually building it on my page so I can visually see everything. So that concludes our changes to our style guide. So it just takes like, 15 to 20 minutes, maybe longer if you're doing it for the first time. It's an incredibly important step because you want to set all this up so it's faster to then build later on. So if I go into my variables and I open that up, I can see here that we have, so there's the primary color, which is just the green for now. I have not identified any alternative color. I was just checking that the shade of white that they're using is the one I'm using. So we'll leave it as green. And then for shades, we have white, black, and gray. You can also reorder variables in case we didn't cover that before. Like if I wanted white, gray to be on top or whatever, you can do that. So now that that's done, I'm gonna go back to my homepage and we're going to actually start building the site. So I'm gonna try and do everything from scratch. I don't think there is anything on this page that needs custom code. Although if there was, it's fine because it also would be good to show you guys how to include, other templates and other code in your site. But for the most part, this homepage seems straightforward. So we're gonna start off with our navigation, which is like this really simple design here. So with our body selected, remember we covered client first. So we're gonna be using the client first approach in this build. So with client first, you always start with your page wrapper. That's the first thing. And then we can go in and add our navigation. So we're going to name our navigation like just nav section. And we're not going to add any of these transitions for now, but we will make it fixed because it does follow the page as you scroll. And it has a green background. So we're going to make the background green. That's the first thing. And then, so right now the menu links are on the left. The logo is on the right. Actually, I need to check how to get this logo in particular. Okay, interesting, interesting, interesting. So I'm just clicking into this to see how they have added this logo. Is it a text element? Is it is it actually a text element? It might be, because I can't really identify. Okay, so it might be text. I don't want to add a new font to my page, so we'll probably just rewrite this in the same heading font we have here. But first, let's set up this layout. So within our nav, the second layer that you always have is padding global, and this is just the left and right padding that you use on your page. And then within that, you have padding vertical. I don't usually have that for navigation, but you have it for other sections, which you'll see. And then within padding vertical, you have your container. So I just gave that container the class of container large. And I think this container, I'm gonna eyeball what the width is, maybe like 80. We'll do 80 rem for now. And then within that, we have one more layer, which is our component layer. So in this case, it's called nav components. Okay. Oops. Okay. So with our nav component selected, because I copied the style guide from like the old site, there's like a lot of style that it came with. I probably should have just copied it from the original template, but that's not a worry. So we'll add in everything to our nav template. And then the next thing you want to do is we want to create this 3-column format. So the best way to use this is actually grid, because you want to make sure that each of these sections are spaced evenly. So we're gonna select grid and we're going to add 3 columns. So our first column will actually be for our, let me actually pin this. Our first column will be for a nav menu. Our second column will be for our, actually I'm gonna make it just a text block for our logo thing here. And then our third column was gonna be for our button. So we'll go in and we'll add a button. And let's give it the style that we wanted as well. Okay, now our nav component, I want to make sure that it's aligned in the center as well, everything. So we'll do that. So this is called Dawn. And let's start with our nav menu. So we're gonna name it nav menu. And then we're not gonna really do much with that because it's fine. We'll just go in and update the links. So we'll call these nav link and we'll apply that class to all of them. Now that we've done that, we'll go in with our fonts and just identify what these fonts are. So this is 16 pixels and font weight normal, so that's fine. So for all our nav links, we're going to select white and then we're going to make sure, well, they're already by default 16 pixels, so that's fine. So we'll leave them as they are and we'll just update. So this is bio. The thing you want to do is maybe make them all capital as well. So this is bio portfolio. Oops. And awards. And then here for our brand, we'll just call this nav logo. And we want to make sure it's centered. Oops, wrong center. We want to make sure it's centered. And because it's text, you also have them to center the text here under alignment. Otherwise, it won't actually be centered. And I'm wondering if there is like a slightly cursive. Okay, there's this. Maybe we use this because here it's like a slightly cursive font. So we can use one of the default fonts that Webflow comes with. Oops. Which is Great Vibes. I don't actually think that there is another cursive font there. Now, this font, if it is a font actually, okay, it even tells you what script it is. It's Seaweed script, which I mean, okay, let's see. Is that a Google font? It is a Google font. Okay, well, because it's a Google font and I don't actually have to download it, I am willing to use it in this case. So I added it to my font library. So I'm just gonna refresh the page. And then because I think this is probably the only place they've used this font, I'm going to select nav logo, which is where this text is within, and I'm going to change the font from there. So I'm going to find seaweed. Where is seaweed? There's seaweed script. And then the size is 29 pixels, which is, I don't know, maybe 1.8 rem or something like that. Should have square, maybe 1.75. So there we have it, our beautiful. And then they think the only other thing is font weight, which is normal. The last thing we're going to edit is this book now. So we'll just change this text to say book now. And then you can see it's stretched out because it's stretched out to fill the column that it's in. If you don't want it to happen that way, in which case we want it to be all the way on the right, we just select our button element. And then here you can have align and justify, and we'll just justify that to the right. So now it's all the way on the right. We didn't cover this in our previous courses, but align and justify are good ways of arranging your elements within a grid or a flex box. You'll notice sometimes when you apply certain classes, they're either blue, orange, or pink. So what does blue mean? If you click it, it tells you that it's inheriting the value from button, which basically means this button with this combo class is giving it this value. Orange means that it's inheriting its value from, you know, a separate element. In this case, it's inheriting the value from our body, because we applied these specific settings to our body. Pink means that this property is only applied to this specific element. So even with classes, it'll only, not all of them will have this applied to it. It's only working for this element. So that's just the distinction that you can keep in mind. So now that our nav is set up, the only thing I want to do is probably increase the spacing on my nav. So in that case, I mean, I could probably use padding vertical for that. So padding vertical, and we'll say like maybe padding small is good enough. So that's enough space. Last thing I'll do is I will make it, maybe I'll make it fixed actually. So I'll make it fixed, which basically means as we scroll through the page, our navigation will scroll as well. So that's our here navigation section done. Before we finish, we can probably complete our hero section here. So before you add in your hero section, you add in your main wrapper. This just tells, you know, Webflow that this is the main content of your page. So basically everything except your navigation and your footer goes into this layer here. And then I'm going to add a section element and I'm going to call it hero section. And then same thing with the navigation, we're going to add in all our different layers like padding global. We can add padding vertical even. I don't know what size we're going to want to work with. So I'm just going to say large. We can add in the container and then we can add in our hero components. You'll see, notice that our section is starting from the top, which is, overlapping our navigation. That's because we used fixed. Fixed basically means it's almost like it's not on the page. It overlaps everything else. So if you made it sticky, then the next section would start below it. And I think we did cover this in an earlier lesson, so I won't go into too much detail about that. But I think I'm going to leave it as fixed for now because essentially this page is roughly 100% of my viewport height. So the height of this is what I'm working with here. So I'm going to select my hero section and I'm going to make it maybe even like 105 VH is what we want to work with there. And then actually, I know I added all these layers, but like we probably don't need them because this is a very unconventional layout that we're working with here. So we have a bunch of images, which, okay, for whatever reason, I cannot download. Let me inspect. Okay, sometimes you can't download images directly. You have to inspect them and then get them from the code, which is always fun to do. So let me just grab all these different images and then I'll download them to my computer. Okay, and then this is the last one. So let me just download all of these images. Okay, now with all those images downloaded, I can start my layout. So I'm actually gonna delete everything here because like I said before, this is an unconventional layout. So we're gonna try and build it from scratch here. So first thing I'm gonna add is my heading. So I applied flex to my hero section because we want our heading to be in the middle. So I applied flex and then I just aligned it in the center. And by default, we already applied the heading one size, so I don't need to change the size or anything like that. I'm just gonna fade down mostly. The one thing I might want to change is the alignment. So on the big screen, it's not going to go into two lines, but on the smaller screen, it might. Actually, if we preview by, okay, so what they've done is as you narrow the page, the text actually also decreases in size. So that requires us to use VW instead of rem, which I think we also covered. So I'm actually going to apply a separate class to this, and I'll call this hero heading. Instead of rem, we can say 15 VW. And then we preview that, we can see that it looks at this size, and then as we reduce the size of the page, the image also reduces in size. I mean, the text also reduces in size. So we're just going to leave that as it is. And then now we have this image gallery. So I'm going to call this hero gallery, and we're going to apply it. I think it stays behind the image. So we're going to give it a position of absolute, and want it to cover our entire container. Now, how you would want to align this image is really up to you. You can manually position each image, which, is not so bad, but maybe it'll take time. Or you can use grids in this case to position your image. Because there's no clear structure, like, okay, these are on the same line, these are kind of on the same line, but these aren't on the same line. So it's like, how many grid columns do we really have here? It's a bit complicated. So I'm actually probably just gonna position all of them separately. So with my gallery selected, I'm gonna add in my first image, which let's say is this one. Actually, I'll start with this one. It's really easiest. So I'm gonna add in that horse image here. And then once that is added, I'm gonna call it, whoops, hero image one, because we're gonna have multiple images. And I'm gonna say the size is like 10 rem. And we're gonna also absolutely position this. So it's gonna be on the top right. The one thing I will say is I actually think I'll make this nav section sticky as opposed to fixed, because it seems to me that this hero section appears underneath the nav. So you'll notice now that we made it sticky. Oops. Is it sticky actually? Make that auto. Yeah. So now that we made it sticky, we can see that our hero, and I'm also gonna just make sure that our hero section is set to relative so that our gallery here in the background is set according to the section. So now we have this image that is all the way here on the right, although it should be longer unless I've used the wrong image. I don't think I have. So it's supposed to be longer, so we can give it a height, but I also prefer to use ratios because then they'll just automatically adjust it for you anyway. So let's say this is landscape, and then we also want to make sure that the fill is covered, and then we can increase the size of this. The other thing I want to also check is as you resize your thing, do the images shrink? They do in this case, which means if we want our images to decrease in size as our page decreases, we can't use rem, we have to use percentage, because then it will decrease in size as the page decreases in size. So as you can see here. So we're going to use percentages. And I think this is supposed to be a bit smaller, like maybe 22 pixels. Then I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to give it a new class, and I'm going to call this hero image 2. And we'll move it to the top left of the container for now, but we need to change the image. We're going to be using this one next to this. So we're going to upload that image. Now we can see here for this one, it's kind of like a square. So instead of landscape, we're going to use square instead. And the sizing is going to be a bit smaller. Like it should be roughly the same sizing as this. So let's say 15 pixels. And it's not on the edge. It's kind of moved forward a bit. So we're going to have to just estimate how much that distance is. Oops. Maybe like around 20 pixels or something like that. That seems to be good enough. Maybe a bit more than 20 pixels, like 25 pixels or something. Okay, then I'm going to once again duplicate this again. I'm going to change this to hero image 3. I'm going to move it down here for now. And then I'm going to replace this image with, we're going to work on that one next. So I'm going to grab that image there. I'm going to add that in here. And then I'm going to also go back and I'm going to change the size of this instead of 105 to be 100, because we just want it to be just below the fold. Now this is going to actually be sort of halfway up. So first thing is we're going to apply landscape to this again. And I think it is actually the same size as this, so that's good. We can use the same sizing here, which is 22%. And then we're just gonna move it up. Now you notice that it is overlapping the image. So a couple things you can do here. You can either select the heading and you can give it a position relative so you can increase the Z index. The higher the Z index, the more it will overlap other elements. So we can just give it a Z index 1 and you can see now it automatically overlaps the text. So we'll do that. We'll preview. That looks pretty good for the most part anyway. The only thing is I think I might decrease the sizes of these a bit more by like 2%. So that's 13%. This is 20% because it's looking a bit too big when I'm looking at it now. Okay. And remember, it doesn't have to look exactly the same because we are in fact, the other thing I will change actually is also the container because it does seem like this container is a bit small. Okay, two more images to go. So we're gonna go with this image here and this one here. So we're just gonna select that, duplicate it. We'll call this hero image 4. We'll change this image. It's supposed to be the eye. So we'll select that eye. Okay, we'll wait for it to change. And then this is going to be, I think this is more of a portrait size. So we're gonna move it back here and we're gonna give it portrait, and we'll probably make it the same width as this one, which is 13%. So we're gonna move it a bit more, to the left here. Maybe, well, actually, it's supposed to be the same as this, so we can actually give it the same, you know, same text. The only other thing is that we don't want it to be too close, so we're actually gonna move it a bit lower. Just pull it down a bit, maybe by 10%, and then we can preview how that looks. Now that we've seen it, we can see it's probably too close to the other one. So for all of them, for both the top and the bottom, we'll also increase this to 30%. And then I'm going to duplicate this for the last time. And this one, I'm going to call it hero image 5. And I'm going to change it to our last image, which is this one. I'm going to select that. And then this is going to be slightly higher. We'll keep the portrait ratio the same, but it's going to be moved slightly to the right. So, I mean, I could increase the right here, but I think it's easier if it starts on the right and then moves to the left. So let's say this is 25%. And then let's preview how that looks. That's actually not bad. I think that's roughly what we want to happen. The only other thing is I feel like portrait is a bit too long for both of these images. So if I preview here, I feel like portrait is a bit too long for both. So I can actually go in and I can, instead of portrait, there's no other alternative here that works, but you can create your own custom. So if 2 by 3 is a bit high, then maybe we want to make it 2 by 2, 5. That's a bit better. And I can also make this -5. So I'll do the same thing here. Instead of portrait, I'll create custom and I'll make it, 2.5 instead. And I'll preview it there. So it doesn't look exactly the same in the example, but it looks pretty similar. Okay, so you can go in and you can keep on making changes as much as you want. Like maybe our text is a bit too low, so you want to move it, oops, up a bit, like by 5%, so it's more centered, like what the example is. But either way, and you can see also as we scroll, our navigation is scrolling as well. And because it has that background, it is overlapping everything else. I mean, if I preview, I can also see how my images shrink, etc. So when we get to that stage where we are making this page responsive, we'll go in and make all those extra edits. But for now, we're just building for desktop. So I'm going to stop there because we've done a lot. And then next week, we will continue on building this page. We might be able to finish this rest of this page next week. And then the week after, we will see if we have time to do one more page. And I want to actually fully finish this to show you even like publishing and all that, and a couple of other things. But up until now, any questions so far? Let me stop sharing.
No, no, no
No questions?
questions.
Oh, actually, the one
Yep.
thing I forgot, Doreen, is you sent me your assignment.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
All right,
Each.
forgot. Let's review that quickly.
Okay.
Let me share my screen again. Okay, so Doreen shared her, this is from when we were building forms. She shared her design for the form. She got her inspiration from Dribble. It's really nice form here. So she was building that out, and this is the final outcome. So already I can say this is a really good job, just in terms of the layout. So you have the placeholder, you have the input field. Oh, I like that there are also these effects, the color of the input, the border of the input field changing color. The only immediately is the color of the text as I'm typing. You can see it's still light. We want to make sure that it appears dark when we're typing. And then
Mm-hmm.
what else? Okay, so let's go back into preview. So like I mentioned, we want to make sure that our text is dark when we're typing. So selecting text field, you give the type color to be quite dark. So you can instead select type color 2. And then for your placeholder is when you can use the light version. So now if I go back, it's showing me the gray version as a placeholder, but when I start typing, it gives me, the light version instead, the dark version instead, sorry, which is what we want. The only tricky thing with placeholders, actually, let me go back and see with select fields. Okay, yeah, same thing with select field. You want to make sure that you are using the dark version. There is no way with select fields to have the dark version also be gray, unfortunately, unless you customize it completely. So it's usually fine as it is like this. If I go in and I check your settings, okay, this is the name field. Okay, this is set as email, but remember to also update the name of this. So this is email here. Company as well, you would update to say company. Here, instead of this defaults, you can actually write industry. And then here you can write payment. So it's also important to make sure to name all your different fields as well. And then let me see what your, so let me actually submit this. Can I? Or is it public? Let me see what your success state looks like. Okay, so you didn't customize the success and the error
Yes,
state.
yes, yes.
Okay, no worries. But for what you've done, this is really good. Did you have any problems with the form? Any questions?
Yeah, like I am seeing when you preview it on your screen, there is
Mm,
such a wide gap
mm,
between the left side and the right. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, why is that there,
How
gap?
can, yeah.
So it's probably because I have a bigger screen. So if your container size, so if I go to container, actually your container doesn't have a maximum width. You want to make sure your container has a maximum width. Otherwise, it'll keep
Wow.
expanding for as wide as the screen is. So in this case, maybe you can say 80 rem is your maximum width. Now, if I preview
Mm-hmm.
and extend beyond
Yeah, sure.
80 rem, so you make that, you can make it smaller, you can make that bigger. But it's important to always make sure the container has a maximum width.
And for instance, like there on the drop down
Hmm.
selection, how do you put icons like the one on the right?
Or
I
the arrow.
wanted it to, yes.
Let
Like,
me
is
stop.
there a way of putting icons in Webflow
You can
apart
put,
from exporting images and putting them
oh,
there?
you can use embed fields. So normally that would
Mm-hmm.
require, like, if you, for example, wrap this in a div block and you use
Mm-hmm.
div block as your styling or whatever. So
Okay.
but by default,
Oh.
it already comes with an arrow, but I think there's sometimes certain changes you can make that'll delete the arrow. I can't remember what they are. But in order to put your own icon, you would wrap
Mm-hmm.
this in a block and then just make sure to give the div block relative. Then you can add in an
Mm-hmm.
input field or an embed field to add in an icon.
Mm-hmm.
That is, and then you can just make that icon absolute and then position it here
Mm-hmm.
so it stays here. But that is how you add that icon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No
Yeah,
worries.
that's
Any,
all.
that's all? Okay, cool.
Yep.
Let me stop sharing. Okay, so that's that. Next week we'll continue with the project. Any questions, feel free to email me if you want me to look at anything. send me a message. And yeah, thanks for watching.